Welcome back to another episode of Void City Customs. I am Dan, and we are going to be looking at something special today. So, as some of you might know, it's coming up on the 30th anniversary of the death of Superman in the comics. So this is like the first time Superman ever was defeated in battle, and that would be by Doomsday. And that was in Superman number 75 from January of 1993. However, I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, it came out a little bit earlier than that. So we might be closer to that 30th anniversary of the death of Superman than everyone remembers. I've already done videos for Doomsday and Superman from that issue of Superman, number 75 from 1993, or possibly earlier, and those will be linked up above most likely. Either way, there were 4 other characters that get introduced shortly after the death of Superman that I thought deserved action figures as well in the McFarlane DC Multiverse scale and style, I guess you would call it. Those would be 4 characters that showed up in The Adventures of Superman number 500, and that was from June of 93. That would of course be the 4 new Supermen that showed up. Steel, the Eradicator, Superboy, and the Cyborg Superman. We can get into a little bit more details about each of them as we look at each of those figures. I'm going to look at one of them per video, and we're going to show them in the order that they appeared in Adventures of Superman number 500. So today we are going to look at the Eradicator. Now this guy showed up, and I have to admit, when I was a kid, I actually thought he was kind of cool. Now looking back, I kind of know, reading his story arc, this guy wasn't Superman, he never was, but I really thought his costume was pretty awesome. I liked the sunglasses. I also thought it was cool that he could shoot lightning bolts and energy blasts out of his hands, but it was kind of weird that he couldn't look at the sun, given that that's the thing that's supposed to give him his powers. Without getting too much more into that, because I don't want to ruin the whole story for you, let's take a closer look at this guy right here. Well, here he is, the Last Son of Krypton. This is the Eradicator, and that was the moniker he was given during the reign of the Supermen story in the comics. Now, he first showed up, as I mentioned before, in Adventures of Superman number 500 in 1993, and then his first sort of solo adventure by himself that kind of introduced his character and then started his story arc was in Action Comics number 687 in 1993. So that's sort of where his story took off. Each of the 4 Supermen had their own title in DC, kind of, basically, that they were the star of. And this guy's was pretty cool. He was a lot darker than Superman had been in the past, a lot more brutal, and there were some heroes that agreed with that new approach and some that did not so much. Either way, pretty much all of them confronted him about it at some point, and that's what most of his story was about, was basically him learning to be Superman after already deciding that he was, and then realizing after the fact that maybe he didn't quite know what it meant to be Superman. Well, let's get down to the recipe for this figure. It's actually pretty simple. I believe it's only 4 different characters you would need, and the work isn't that much. However, this one does require a little bit of carving with a knife or a Dremel for the chest part. So, warning about that in advance, you will need some tools for this one, although you usually need them for the figures I make, so you're probably used to that by now. So, first and foremost, with the body for this guy, he is made out of the Batman Omega figure, and that was part of the Bane Build-A-Figure wave from McFarlane Toys. I saw that figure and I thought, just the way the suit was set up with the black and the gray, that I could repaint it to black and blue and it would work perfectly for an updated Eradicator costume. It's pretty close to how it was in the comics, but it just adds some updated textures and lines and things like that to it to make it not as plain, I guess you would say. But that's part of why I really liked it. I didn't just want to take a Superman body and mask it off and then just paint part of it black. I thought that would be kind of boring. The head and the emblem both come from the Superman versus Batman from Earth 1, or is it Earth -1? I'm not sure. I've seen it written both ways. But it's basically Superman versus Devastator. It's a 2-pack from McFarlane Toys. That's the Superman figure I chose because he had an angry face, and I knew I wanted kind of an angry or mean Superman face for Eradicator, so I'm very glad that figure came out. Gave me the perfect solution because he still has Superman's face and his hair, but looking angry. And not a lot of Superman figures have an angry face, so I think that worked perfect for Eradicator here. And the same for the emblem. It comes from that same figure. And for those of you that don't know, that figure is basically just Action Comics 1000 Superman with a different head. So it has one of the larger Superman emblems on the chest from the figures. So that's why I chose that one, because the Eradicator kind of has a larger emblem on his chest. And in part, it's what holds on the cape. Now, the cape, that comes from the Darkfather Build-A-Figure. And that's basically the same cape I used for my Steel figure as well. Obviously, I had several of them lying around, and we'll get into that and how it's attached. The visor, or sunglasses, those come from a McFarlane My Hero Academia figure, which is called Mirio, I believe is how you say it. I don't watch the show, so if I pronounce that wrong, I apologize. Either way, that's where his goggles came from. There was some work I had to do to those. I'll get into that in a little bit. Last is the energy crackling around his hands. I knew I wanted to have some sort of an accessory or effect to show that off, because that was one of the unique things about him, was he could shoot energy beams out of his hands. So I actually got those from some Flash action figures. Primarily, you could use the ones from Injustice Flash. I believe I used just both versions of those, from the Injustice Flash and the repaint version. That's why there's two of them that are slightly different colors. But I guess you could just get away with having one if you just want to have it on one hand. I had both those laying around, and I hate putting those on the Flash action figures. I think they look goofy. But for this figure, I thought it looked all right and did what I wanted it to. So there you have it. That is the recipe for the Eradicator. Let's get into looking at how I made him. So first things first, I had this body for the Omega Batman figure. And I popped off the head off that guy and disassembled the body into all the pieces, and then I sprayed them all black with Rust-Oleum vinyl and fabric paint. That's typically what I use when I'm spraying a large part of a figure or any soft part of an action figure. It adheres very well, and it is flexible, which is nice, which allows it to not chip off in most situations where a regular or enamel paint would do so. I went back in afterwards and painted that interior stripe and then the two stripes on his arms with blue AV Vallejo paint. I believe I'm saying that right. If not, again, I apologize. But that is basically the whole story of his body. Then I just reassembled it afterwards, and that was good to go. Now, obviously, before I reassembled it, I carved out the chest to make a shape to put the emblem into, but we will get to that in a little bit. Next was the head. I just popped it off of that Superman figure and put it on this guy. That was simple as that. That one's probably the easiest part of this whole thing. The emblem, after boiling the figure, I pried it out of the chest. It's glued in there. I carved the back of the emblem off because there is kind of a big peg on the back of it to slot it into the Superman chest. So I carved that so this is basically flat. And then I carved out a little bit of the chest underneath there so that it had something to kind of fit into. So there is a bit of a diamond shape carved out of there, so it does fit in there. It's not just glued over the surface. And underneath the top corners is where the cape is actually nailed in there. Now I use those little itty bitty nails that I always use. Again, trimmed them to the right length and punched them through. So it is fastened on there with little nails and then glued underneath there as well with my trusty Gorilla Glue that I always use. That cape, also sprayed again, as with the steel cape, with the Rust-Oleum or sometimes Duplicolor, whichever one I have around, vinyl and fabric paint. And as you can see, it covered up that blue very well. I trimmed off the bottom of the scallops for the Batman part, and also because it's way too tall for a regular figure. And then I just trimmed open the front where it would normally close, and then just kind of bent it around and tacked it on there. So that was actually easier than a lot of the other parts of making this guy, or any of the other figures for that matter. The visor, as I mentioned, comes from a My Hero Academia character called Mirio. Now his visor is more round on the top. I had to trim mine kind of more flat, just so it kind of fit this guy's face better and was flat across the top like I wanted. And as you can see on the sides, I did punch little holes in the sides of his head for those little nails just to help fasten it in there. The nails are glued into his head, but the visor is not glued. So it does go a little bit up and down depending on what direction you're aiming his head. You can kind of adjust the visor a little bit depending on how you want it to look. Now, because he was Omega, he does come with interchangeable hands, so you can have him have energy grasping hands or just fists, which is something a lot of people want Superman figures to have anyways. So now you can have either one. That's nice. And if you really want, you can put these effects back on his hands to make him have his lightning hands again. Again, pretty easy. They just slip right on there. There you have it. That's pretty much about all there is to it. This guy seems, after the fact, like he was pretty simple, although I do remember the cape taking a while to figure out until I took a look at the Dark Father cape. I had planned to use a whole different cape for him, and I was just going to attach it differently, but after finding the Dark Father cape, I realized I could make it work, so I did. Either way, I was quite happy once this guy was done. I thought he fit in well with the rest of the reign of the Supermen, of which you will see in the other videos. And it was a fun build overall. I really enjoyed completing this guy. Well, that has been it for today's episode of Void City Customs. Keep it here for the other videos in the series, especially for this Reign of Superman set. And you can see all 4 of them. Once they are all out, they will all be linked together through each video. So until then, thanks for watching again. Remember to like and subscribe, ring that bell so that you can make sure to see all the next videos when they come out, but keep it here, especially over this next month, to see the entire 4-part Reign of Superman set. Until next time, I am Dan, and as always, I will see you next time.